Lily learned
Hi,
this
we are going to begin. Thank you all for coming to Lily's senior project presentation. I started working with Lily many years ago, I believe as a sophomore for creative writing. And so I've been familiar with Lily's writing in poetry for quite some time and her tremendous talent as a poet. It was quite an honor to be asked to supervise her on this senior project and really seeing how this idea for a poetry collection has evolved. And frankly, to be to gain firsthand experience on the process of completing such a major work and how that creative process evolves and changes as an individual evolves and changes, it's really quite remarkable. Lily has a supreme gift, and you know, I think that what we've learned from the process is that dedication, hard work, all of that is really important, and as educators we tend to emphasize that, but really at the end of the day, there is this innate natural talent that almost seems otherworldly that comes into a creative writer, and Lily has that talent. So without further ado, please give a round of applause for Lily Robbins.
Thank you for coming. Yeah. Okay, so I started writing poetry like a little while ago, a couple years ago, but I didn't get really into it until Patricia's creative writing class. And yeah, I just kind of want to jump into it. Okay. What is happening? Oh, okay. So this is like the plan and like background on the plan. The plan was that I was going to write a poetry collection. Woo! I mostly wanted to like push myself creatively and experimenting where I get my inspiration from, because when I first began writing poetry, I could only really write poetry when I was feeling some intense emotions, and I'd only really like, that's like kind of like the only way I could like channel, I don't know, I would channel that into writing, but you don't really have intense emotions all the time, and I kind of wanted to get away from that, and just kind of find new forms of inspiration and try to push myself in that way. Yeah, I also did a summer camp last summer, going into this year, with the New York Times, and so I went to New York and I wrote with them for a while, and I that was like a really big way for me to experiment with, what's it called? Inspiration. That's the word. Because I was kind of just really disconnected from everything, and I was kind of in like a really big new city by myself for 2 weeks. And so I met a lot of new people, and I was visiting a lot of new places, and I wrote about those a lot. And I experimented a lot with also like structure. I wrote a lot of like weird prose during that time too. And so that kind of got me, I think, out of like a box I was in with my thinking. Yeah, okay, so research. 1 out of 2 slides, and I think I like forgot some stuff. So basically, if you're a writer, you know, and if you want to start writing, you have to read like a lot, even more than that. So like I did a lot of reading, and then I did some more. So I read a lot of collections. Sylvia Plath is one of my favorite poets, so I read Crossing the Water, The Colossus and Other Poems, and Ariel, which are poetry collections by her, and I also read The Bell Jar, which is like a kind of like semi-autobiography kind of novel that she wrote. And then Anne Sexton is also one of my favorite poets. I read her All My Pretty Ones. Walt Whitman, Leaves of Grass, Marge Piercy, Mars and Her Children. I like something, this guy's name, Love Visions, Keisha Pan, The Awakening, Little Women. Those are just some more books. And then these are other authors that I read. I didn't read specific collections by them fully, but I read a lot of their poetry. I also watched a lot of videos where poets would just sit there and read their poetry for like 2 hours, and then they would just like explain kind of their process. And these were like usually kind of like weird videos I found on YouTube. That were like recorded in the 1950s, and then like some weird photo was just like the background, so that was really awesome. And so I watched a bunch of those. Okay, so my writing process and inspiration. So it's obviously changed a lot since I began writing. I also kind of like said some of this other stuff on the other side, but usually it used to be like a really big challenge for me to write about something physical, other than emotions, or kind of something like mundane, something like I experience in everyday life. So over last summer and the year before I started, well, summer before last year, summer, it was hard for me and I kind of gave up. But last summer I started really trying to experiment. So I started writing a lot about nature, animals, history. I wrote a lot of like historical poems, especially poems that are concerned with the life of being a woman, because I think that's kind of a big thing. And even if the poem isn't specifically about being a woman, it always seems to find a way to slip into my writing. And let's see, so my writing process usually consists of me thinking about an idea that I have for a poem for days, for weeks, and something that I actually didn't write, put this on the slideshow, but something I experienced a lot, especially with college applications, was like writing burnout. Because I would sit there and I would write for just like hours a day, college applications, and then like when I try to go write about like something really like, I don't know, like poetry, it's kind of like a really big difference in writing, and I found it like really hard to like switch between those every single day. But so basically I would just sit with ideas. Now obviously like my notes app, I probably have like 50 different notes of just like little phrases or like lines of poetry or like small stanzas, things that I think of just throughout the day. And I also have a list of like ideas of poetry I want to write. And then once I find the time, or if I get struck by some inspiration, I usually sit down and write a poem all in one go. And I actually like, I never really go back and edit any of my poems. Which I know you're like kind of supposed to do in writing, that's like kind of a thing you do, but I always find that like whenever I try to go back and edit, I either am not in this kind of like headspace that I was when I wrote the poem, or I just like, I always tend to make it worse somehow. So I just kind of like, it's kind of like a learning process of like going with your gut when you first write something. Especially I think it's different with fiction writing or nonfiction writing like prose, because I don't know, but for poetry you kind of have to like, I don't know, I just like, you just gotta go with it, you know? Okay, so the slight problem that I encountered, my journal. So I started writing in a journal last summer, all of my poems, because I kind of hate where the world is going with technology, and I don't want to like rely on technology to have all of my writing in it. Turns out when you don't rely on technology, you can lose physical things. So I had this journal that I wrote everything down in, and I misplaced it. All of my poems, not all of them, a lot of them. And I'm sure once I'm cleaning stuff out for college, I'll find it, but at this moment in time, I don't know where it is. So that was a problem. Also has like a bunch of ideas, kind of sucks. Okay, so this collection. So in this collection, my manuscript, I have 18 poems, more if you count my journal, which I don't have. The longest poem that I wrote is 2.5 pages, just like, I don't even know. And no stanza breaks or anything. That I wrote last summer, and that one won a Scholastic Gold Key. And yeah, and then and also I usually, most of my poems remain untitled, usually because, I don't know, the whole poetry writing process, I try to leave to my intuitive side, and so if a title doesn't come to me right off the bat, I just assume that it's meant to be left untitled. I also think that titles have like a really specific role that they play in poetry, and so if I don't have a title that represents like, I don't know, the poem's like feeling, I don't know, I don't want to push it, so I don't. Yeah, also I have my poems, 4 of them, printed out that I want to like have people read and pass around. I don't really know when there's a good time to do that. What do you think? Right now. Okay, so here are just some of them. You can just like pass them around. Those ones aren't too long. I tried to like keep them really short. Oh yeah, so next year, obviously I'm going to college, And so I'm gonna just continue building my portfolio. Hopefully there'll be like writing groups in college that I can join, because I kind of found that if I don't have something motivating me to write, I kind of, not that it slipped out of my mind, but I think I'm just a busy person, and it's hard to find time to kind of like tap into that creative side if I'm not motivated by something else. So yeah, I would also eventually love to publish something, possibly this manuscript, when and if I find my journal and continue to add to it. And yeah, that's it. Questions? Yeah.
When do you know when to stop? Because at least for me, when I'm writing, I never know when to stop or when is like a good finishing line. When do you are like, oh, this is it?
So I never actually finish any of my poems, or at least I don't think I do. I kind of just stop when, I don't know, I really just go by my gut. Like I literally won't, I don't know, I don't ever think that this is an ending, there's an ending point. I think that like if I go back and I want to add to any of my poems, I've done that like a couple times, like that's great. But I think that if you think about the ending too much, it's almost like, you know, people tell you to like stay in the present, don't think about the future. It's the same thing. If you keep thinking about the ending to a poem, you're just gonna want to get there. So just focus on line by line, and if you kind of, I don't know, if you just stop, you stop, and that's okay. Nothing, it doesn't have to have an ending.
So when you said you were focusing on like some more like mundane things, are there any like specific like mundane parts of your life that you found like a lot of inspiration in?
Yeah, so one of my poems, actually one on that packet, is called, what's it called? It's like, I wrote about a lemon that I saw on our San Diego trip, and it was like just like a perfectly like cut like lemon on the ground. And I wouldn't say that I like write just about like super mundane things. I kind of let that take me somewhere else. But I would say like, not that nature is in any way mundane, but I think that it's a lot of times something that gets like, I don't know, forgotten. And especially because we live in a really big city, and it's kind of hard to just like kind of get out of city vibes. But I think that that is a really big inspiration for me. So yeah.
Can you please send me a copy of one that ends "I'm a woman of stained glass"?
Yes, I
Thank
will.
you. Thanks. I like
Yes,
that one.
Scarlett.
Is there at all a theme to this manuscript at all, or is
A
it just
theme?
Yeah.
I would say there's a couple prominent themes. Nature is probably a really big one of them. Not only nature, but I don't know, how I as a kind of human interact with nature. And also just like inner thoughts of me thinking about my like womanhood. I would say those are two really big themes. Yeah.
What's the hardest part of writing poetry?
Probably, let me think for a second. I would say getting in your head too much, because I think that like a lot of times, for me, like I'll be writing poetry and I'll always be like, oh, like that sounds like stupid. But that's kind of like the whole point, you know? So I think like if you get in your head too much and you start thinking about, like I literally, the best way to write poetry is literally just to put words down on a page, no matter how stupid it sounds. And I think a lot of times I would like get in my head and think about, I don't know, how things are supposed to sound. That's not even a thing, but you know. And I think like a lot of time if you read a lot, actually I think if you read only a certain thing, like a certain couple things, you start to get stuck in like this is how my writing is supposed to sound. But I think that once you start like reading a lot of different things, you kind of realize that no one author sounds exactly the same. Yeah. Yep.
like about like your own like writing style, I guess, like and like how like kind of like interacts with like the rhythm or like the voice of poetry? Do you think like through this like you kind of develop like your own like unique like specific thing, or is it like an array of things?
Yeah, I think I definitely have figured out my voice. One of my, I know I have this in my head, one of the first poems I wrote like recently like it almost sounds completely different. And I think it's because I wasn't reading enough. I feel like I always come back to reading more. I don't think you can ever read enough. But I wasn't reading enough, and so I didn't really understand like the possibilities of what I could write. And so I think like as I started reading more, my voice has kind of changed. Just, I don't know, it's just become, this is such a stupid answer, more me. Yeah, and I think I tend to lean more on the lyrical side of things. I don't know if that's true, but yeah. That's cool.
One more question maybe?
Yeah.
Do you ever have like a really strong like visual association when you're writing poetry, or is it more like emotional and non-tangible?
I would say probably about half the time.
Yeah.
I feel like some of the things that I write about, there's this one poem I wrote about a deer, and so obviously like I like wrote it while I was looking at it, so like I kind of had this visual thing, but it's almost like, I don't know, it's almost more of like a feeling. I really can't describe it,
Yeah.
but it's like, I don't even know. It's like it's more of like a feeling the words kind of thing, yeah.